Thank you very much indeed. I suggest you hold your applause until you've actually heard the presentation. Check that it warrants it. So anyway, nice to be here. Nice to meet you. There's a disclaimer which is very important, and please read that in great detail. Right. So first of all, what am I doing here? Why is this relevant? What do I know about this sort of stuff? I have been many things during my life, some more competently than others. Everything from a software engineer through to sort of founder, CEO, and I'm currently exec director of the Confidential Computing Consortium, which is a Linux Foundation project. We'll get to that a little bit later on. I consider myself a geek, possibly not as geeky as some of the folks in this room or at this conference, but I like to think that I am. And I'm very much an open source guy. I've been using open source for since about, I guess, 97, and has been running Linux as my main desktop since about 98, when it really meant something. It was difficult then. It's just too easy now. It's hardly fun, but there we go. I love tea. There's a picture of me with a cup of tea. And very difficult to get in San Francisco, but Pete's Coffee will do you half-decent tea at a decent temperature. Thank you very much indeed, Lisa. You can find me there if you want to find out more about me. I have a blog, and I also wrote a book, which is available in the bookstore, it turns out, called Trust in Computer Systems and the Cloud. But why are you here is probably more important in this context. So this is one of those headlines that everyone's seen and can't remember where they came across it, so I searched it out. Open source 1, so now what? This is August the 11th, 2016. Apparently still faces problems in 2016. I guess we're over all of those problems now, but hey. AI, open source, all relevant. And this is a lovely one. So it's estimated that FOSS, so free and open source software, constitutes 70 to 90% of any given piece of modern software solutions. And what this means is that whether you think you're using open source or not, you're using open source. It's there. And not only do you need to understand what that means, but you might want to think about whether open source is right for your company and actually using and creating open source projects for you. And that's what we're here to talk about. So there we go. And if you're not part of it, you'll be chewed up and swallowed, apparently. So, RSA 24. This is where you want to go, right? This is why you're at this talk. You want to know how to get fame and fortune, and you want to avoid all of these horrible things. Because these are some of the dangers associated with doing open source if you do it wrong for your company. People may just not care. Right? You put it out and nothing happens. It could make you competitively a failure. A lot of people worry about that and their companies. And of course, it could just be a wasted investment. So let's aim for these things up here. I should warn you that I was a founder of an open source company, and you don't see me doing any of those things. I'm here speaking to you at RSA. So it doesn't always work. But I would contend that it absolutely can, and it's certainly worth understanding why and how you're going to do it. So let's get to the core of the thing. This is going to be a very short presentation. I think we can probably get through it in about 4 minutes. We can all go and off and have a coffee. So don't do these things and we're sorted. Don't just throw it over the wall. Don't just say, we've done it, it's now open source, we're all good. Don't do what the techies tell you. Techies are idiots. I'm a techie, I'm an idiot. Don't do what the business people tell you. This was me in a very short-lived flirtation with a beard. It just didn't work at all. My wife was very clear about that. So don't do what the business people tell you. I'm a business person, I'm an idiot. And yeah, the less said about marketing picture, the better. And the last one is don't assume that once you've made it open source, it's somebody else's problem. And I was very pleased to find this picture. Anyone know what it's from? SCP? Somebody else's problem? Cricket matches? Oh dear, oh dear. It's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, SCP. Dear, oh dear. Disappointed in you. So we're done. That's it. No applause. Okay, so let's do some real stuff that you can actually do something useful with. And I'm going to start, because I'm old, with a reference. Yep, it's Sting. post the police with, if you love somebody, set them free. And this is, for me, the key paradox about open source. That you want the project to succeed, right? You as the creator of that project, maybe the company that created that project, has put it out there, want it to succeed. But if it does succeed, you lose control of it. And there's a real tension there, and that's something you need to understand if you're going to go out and do something with it. And it's manageable, but if something really takes off, you cannot control it if it's that good. So, how do you deal with it? And in order to do that, you need to understand the three different vertices of this triangle. Very pleased that I can remember the word vertices, given how jet lagged I am. You need to understand about community. You need to understand about strategic fit, and you really, really need to understand about licensing. So, we're going to spend some time talking about all of these in different ways. So, and we're going to finish off with a real-world example. And along the way, I'm going to talk about open source foundations. These are things like the Linux Foundation or the Eclipse Foundation. Quite a few of those around, because they're really important to how you think about open source, and if you want to go and think about open source and business specifically. So let's start off with strategic fit, or why do you want to do this? So I kind of think that there are three big types of application or code that you might want to be thinking about open sourcing, and for different sets of people. I mean, the first is your core business software, the software which is absolutely central to your business. And that's a big, scary thing to open source, but it absolutely can work. That's kind of the thing in the middle. On the left, we've got something which is useful for the community at large, something that maybe you've created, and you think, well, look, we can't be the only people with this problem. Maybe other people would benefit from using this. Maybe PyTorch might be a good example of something like that. And on the right, there's something which is going to help grow your ecosystem and hopefully grow your business more generally, whether that's helping your suppliers, your partners, or your customers, and possibly your competitors. You've got to be aware of that as well. And that's the third type of thing. And there's different reasons for open sourcing each of these. So here are kind of some of the things that you might open source and the reasons you might open source them. So the first and the most obvious one is just open sourcing your APIs. And if you do this, this allows more people to access what you're doing and reduces friction to interaction with you and with your company and with your applications, etc., etc. There's been some court cases about whether things need to be open source in terms of whether access to APIs is available or not, but if in doubt, why not? Well, we'll see some of the reasons later, but APIs, the first place you might think about doing it. The next one is helper applications, and that kind of fits into this wider community utility, I think, or maybe ecosystem enablement. And so if for instance, you are taking in data sets into your core application, and they need to be formatted in a particular way, then maybe providing a tool that you use internally, which other people could use as well, would help them to open source it, to format it, and making that open source makes a lot of sense. Maybe your customers or your colleagues or whoever can find a more efficient way of doing it or use it for other things as well. So that's a great thing to be open sourcing. Or things to help configure what people are doing. All makes sense to make that available and help other people help you make it work. So the next one is libraries. Rather than necessarily putting out your entire software base, maybe there are particular libraries that are useful. Again, maybe they're libraries for formatting, maybe they're libraries for cryptographic primitives, maybe they're libraries for checking, whatever it may be. But that's another thing which is certainly worth thinking about. And the fourth one is the most scary, and that is your core software, the software that you run your business on. And I contend that is worth doing. I absolutely do. But you absolutely have to get it right. So this is the next thing we're going to start about and think about how you do that. But before we do that, there's kind of an interesting question here about assuming that we are taking this from a business point of view, right? Most businesses would at some point like to make some money from what they're doing. And therefore, we need to think about how can we actually make money out of what we're doing. So this has been something which people have struggled with since open source kind of started. I'll start at the bottom, I think, for this one. I used to work for Red Hat. And Red Hat does not sell a product. That may confuse people. It doesn't sell you Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It doesn't sell you Ansible. What it does is it sells you a subscription to use that product, and more specifically, to have support and maintenance and patching around that product. And so, again, it's probably worth arguing that Red Hat, having been bought by IBM for $34 billion a few years ago, didn't see much of that, despite the fact that I was working there at the time, has a very successful model. And lots of people have copied that and used it, and it can absolutely work. Another model, just going up from the bottom, is lock-in. You want to encourage people to use your software, and you not physically lock them in, but you make it so easy to use your stuff that by providing these open source tools or utilities around it, that it's obvious that it's the best way for them to do it. They just get the easiest way of doing it. The community builds something which is so compelling, why would you do something else? Bundling is another, where you're thinking, okay, I'm going to be bundling some open source pieces with what I do, and again, adding value to what your core product is. And the last one is, I think, really very relevant in the world today of SaaS and all other types of AAS, which is services, providing services. And that is where you have an open source product and you decide that you're going to run a service that does something for other people. And that could be almost anything. It could be an AI type service. It could be a security type service. It could be running a mail service, web service. All of these things are typically open source, but they have services run on top of them. This is really scary and tricky for startups, particularly because finding a way to keep yourselves competitive and protect yourselves from big players who want to do the same thing if you've got a bright idea can be very hard indeed. So this is where we're going to talk about licensing in a moment, and there are some ways that you can help yourself by understanding what the options are there. So let's carry on to licensing. There's been a lot of press recently about what open source is. There are a lot of people putting out things which they call sort of business open or core open, which, according to the definitions generally accepted, which is the one from the Open Source Initiative, are not open source. I'm not going to go into the definition specifically. It's worth looking it up. It's quite a long document. But the basic idea is that if you make something open source, it should be available for anybody to use and change as they wish. But if they, depending on the license, generally they have to feed back into the community changes that they have made. It also doesn't restrict the usage to which things are put, which can be tricky in certain contexts. If, for instance, you have particular views about moral or ethical uses of particular software. But once it's out there, you really can't control it. But I urge you to go to the OSI. They're doing a great job at the moment actually on AI definitions for open source. But there are quite a few different licenses which the Open Source Initiative, the OSI, count as open source. And I'm absolutely not an expert in this. There's some very good experts around who can help you with this. but the license that you choose will impact on your business model. And for the love of shiny things, do not try to roll your own license. This is very complex stuff, which a lot of people have got wrong, and some of which has still not been tested in court. It's not worth doing your own thing. Really, it's not. But back to the previous point, the suggestion that the license that you choose impacts your business model. So remember I talked about the services, being able to run services. Well, it turns out that there are some license models that are particularly well suited for some open source for which you as the creator of that open source want to run services. There's one particularly called the LGPL, you'll notice it's there, which allows you not to restrict how other people use it, but it provides a way that if they do use it, how they use it may become not worth their while. So, for instance, I believe that Amazon has a blanket rule that they will not use open source software under the LGPL because it's just not worth their while from a legal and a business point of view. There are others, however, like the MIT license or the Apache license, where it's very easy to use this stuff and to make it available, and for anyone can do what they want with it. And so when we come to the use case a bit later on, I'll talk about how we chose the license models for the different parts of the stack to allow us to have a business model that we could operate under. And although the company failed, it wasn't for those reasons, so that's nice to know. I'll be taking questions at the end, so please, if you have any, make sure that you note them down and maybe reference which slide they're relevant to so I can go back if needs be. So I should also say that licensing is not the only part of the pie here. And again, if you're looking to run a business around open source, you should really understand these other things. Trademarks, not necessarily that relevant to software. They can be, but they don't tend to be. The other two pieces are, however, very interesting and important indeed. So the copyright that you have, particularly if you're using LGPL, for instance, does have a big impact on the business model and the control that you have over how software is used and how you can operate with it as well. But patents are also interesting. I've got 100 or so patents collected over the years, not quite sure how. But people are concerned sometimes about patents and open source. And a number of people within open source are not happy with the idea of patents at all, and I think that's fair enough. I think that we might be in a better world completely if we didn't have software patents, but we are where we are. But there are ways of operating alongside patents and open source. And there's a particularly good example, which is the one from Red Hat, which has been adopted by other companies around the world. And the Red Hat patent promise has been around for quite a few years now. They updated it about 4 years ago, I think. And the basic idea is that they say that for any patent that they have, which they own, they are happy for anybody else to implement software that goes along with that patent, as long as that software is itself open source, which is really quite clever. And they say they will grant a free and lifelong patent license to that software, or the owner of that software, as long as it is open source. And that's a very clever way of allowing innovation, but stopping people from abusing it. There are also organizations like the Open Invention Network who work to protect people using patents in open source. And I urge you to look at that as well. So if you're interested in patents around open source, feel free to talk to me later on. It's something I've got quite a lot of expertise in. But let's go back to this question of community. Remember the paradox I said with the very old picture of Sting? Before you get to the community, you have to build a community. And they don't just rise up. And that picture I had with someone throwing something over a wall, when we talk about throwing software over the wall, what we mean by that is a company, and some companies, for one of whom I used to work for, have kind of a bad rep for this. They say we're going to open source something, so they just declare it open source and say it's great, and now everyone should be happy and everyone should use it. And they're surprised when nobody does. Because just making something open source doesn't mean that it's useful for people, that it's fit for purpose, that anyone's going to help manage it. Things don't just happen like that. You need to understand, you need to be part of the building of that community. Think about how they would use it. Is it something which is a utility for other people? Is it something that is going to be relevant to your customers, to your partners, to your ecosystem? And build that, because otherwise it's just going to wither on the vine. So you need people, and you need people who understand open source. Open source people are strange. I am an open source person, I am strange. We think in particular ways about things and about how the world works, who should have control over things, how democracy, small d, very big scare quotes around it, works in terms of open source projects, and it's complex. And so getting people on board who understand it before you open source something is absolutely vital if it's something that you plan to do. But it leads to some business questions. If you want a community to grow around this because you think it's going to benefit your company, you have to decide who pays for this, right? Because you're going to need, well, first of all, these open source people, and they're not going to spend all of their time just coding on this piece of open source. They have to build that community. They have to work with other people. They need to find other people who might be interested. They need to deal with bug reports, which may be irrelevant to your core business. They need to be helping documentation happen. They'll want to be going to conferences, because we like conferences. There's going to be a whole bunch of things that need to happen in order to allow this community growth. And there's other stuff as well, like, I don't know, you want a nice logo. If you're going to be part of Foundations, we'll come to Foundation, how do you pay for that as well? So it's not just the core cost of people who are going to grow the community, but it's the things around that. Now, hopefully, the trade-off of this is going to be good, and it's going to come out in your favor in the longer term, but it's not always easy to attribute that growth directly to the cost. So be aware of that. And there's another thing at the bottom, and this is something that kind of you need to start getting your head around. It's really important, but difficult too. As I said before, 70–90% of people use open source, well, more than that, 70–90% of projects use open source already. Let's say that your open source project uses Rust, right? I'm a big Rust fan, learned Rust a few years ago, lovely language, difficult in places, but lovely. And Rust is, like many open source projects, a growing thing, particularly at the moment. It's still getting to maturity. What if, in order to make the most of that, you need to have some improvements to Rust itself? The compiler maybe needs a new flag because you're going to be compiling on a new platform. Should you be paying for that? Should you be contributing to that? Maybe you're running on Linux. Should you be part of the Linux community? And my argument is absolutely you should. Because otherwise, this can lead to a tragedy of the commons where people are just using stuff but not feeding back into what they're doing. And again, this can be very difficult for business people to get their heads around, that there's a responsibility to the wider community and the wider ecosystem which you are leveraging to make things happen. Open source is not run by 16-year-old kids and 66-year-old greybeards in basements and garrets anymore, if it ever was. It is run by professionals working for large and small companies, and some hobbyists as well, of course, but somebody needs to pay for this stuff, and it is vitally important, particularly around security, that somebody does. I'm not going to go into that rant. If you're interested in that, catch me later. Look at the OpenSSF, particularly in the Linux Foundation, and I think there's a talk about this tomorrow, in fact. So the point is that the broader ecosystem is something that if you're going to use it, you have a responsibility, I would say, to make sure it happens. And that is certainly an ethical responsibility, but probably a business responsibility as well. And when I say languages here, I don't just mean computer languages. What if you're going to be employing people in a country where there's not documentation has not been fully translated, for instance? Would it not be useful if you had somebody to do that, even if it's a part-time job that they're doing alongside other work? So there's a bigger set of problems around building community than just paying someone to do it. So I said before I'd talk about open source and foundations, because a lot of the stuff I talked about is difficult, right? And it may feel like if you're just writing a check to a particular person, to a set of 2 or 3 people, that they're not actually going to have that much impact. And one way of dealing with this problem is through economies of scale. And arguably, these open source foundations are about economies of scale. So what do open source foundations offer to open source? Well, they offer a home, first of all. If you have an open source project, one of the things that open source foundations do is they can accept that project. They can become owners of it, which means that you don't need to worry about all the day-to-day stuff. Doesn't mean you can't still be involved and actually still have quite a lot of ownership around it and maintenance of it, but you don't have to worry about all of it. They provide tools to do things like track how healthy your project is, or how much reach it's getting, or whether it's violating licenses, all those sorts of things. They also have growth schemes. If you want to be growing your community, well, one way is to leverage things like the Outreachy project or the Linux Foundation mentoring project to help grow what you're doing. They also provide visibility that there's no way that a single company, particularly a small company, would be able to get for their project. So I'm the executive director of the Confidential Computing Consortium, and we are down in the exhibitor halls today with a booth, and we are showing off the projects which are members of the consortium. In ways that those projects, there's no way they would be able to afford a booth or any visibility at this sort of conference otherwise. Also, great opportunities for collaboration. So not only does this mean that you have visibility in what other projects are doing, and say, okay, well, actually, there's a dependency here that I didn't know about, or there could be a dependency, and maybe we can rewrite this code so we share it, those sorts of things. But also, antitrust is a concern for many people, right? If you've got a company and you're using the same software as a competitor, it makes sense for both of you maybe to use it, but if you start working together on that, there are concerns about antitrust legislation, right? That you'll be seen to be unfairly competing against others by collaborating. And one of the things that software foundations allow you to do is to short-circuit that, because they have rules and regulations about how you interact, how those interactions are managed, and all those sorts of things. And I'll talk again about that when we get to the example. Oh, yeah. When I said don't throw stuff over the wall, that includes the code, right? This is actual code that I wrote. Do not ever use it. This is my early days of Rust. I'm not a great Rustation anyway, but please don't use it. It's just some code. But if you're going to open source this code, are the comments in it going to be embarrassing? I've literally seen people who, looking to open source code, having to remove F words and worse in their code before they open source it, because it just doesn't make sense. Are the comments useful, quite apart from the else? Could they be libelous? Could there be references to intellectual property? All those things you need to worry about. What about the style? Is the style something you'd be happy with? Is it appropriate for the community? Does it use tooling which is available to the rest of the community, or is it use tooling that's internal? Can it be reproduced? Reproducibility is very important in security software. Is there documentation? Is there communication around how you use that generally? So again, thinking about your code and preparing it, not to mention the rest of the community, for open source is an important task. It's one in some ways of the easier tasks, but believe me, legal will want to get involved, quite apart from the licensing. And we all love it when legal get involved, don't we? I'm not even going to ask if there's any lawyers in the room. So I've got a few minutes to talk about an example. And the example is NArch. It's a project, open source project that I founded, co-founded. It's written in Rust, and I created it whilst I was at Red Hat. It is a security project using confidential computing. So things like SGX, TDX, SCV, data protection use using hardware TEs. Again, if you care about this sort of stuff, please find me later. Lots of conversations to be had. So it was created, I said, while I was at Red Hat, and we decided to donate it to the Confidential Computing Consortium, which is a Linux Foundation project. So we decided, as part of Red Hat, that it made sense for it to be part of a larger community, the CCC. This has worked very well for it. And it worked very well for us because not too many months later, we decided to create a company, a startup called Profion, which we got VC funding for, funding which we, burned through, but there we go. And so we founded a product, a company around it. And there were 3 different types of software associated with it. And we chose the licensing very carefully for each of those. So the first one was what I'd call enabling software. And that is the actual NArch stuff itself. And it's basically a mini operating system, which allows you to do things within a trusted execution environment and had syscalls all the way down. So we wrote microkernel. I didn't write it. WebAssembly, WASM, WASI, operating environment. So, but in order to do anything, people needed to have this and be able to use it and improve it, because we couldn't really create a service or set of services around it otherwise. So we made it Apache 2, which basically you can do what you want with it. You should make sure that improvements go back into the project, but you could do what you want with it. There were, however, 2 core services pieces around which we intended to run our business and create services. And they were called Drawbridge and Steward. It's all sort of castle-y type naming. And those, we didn't want people just to take and steal and use as they wanted. So we chose the LGPL 3 license, and we kept the copyright. Remember I talked about copyright before? This is one of those contexts where keeping the copyright in the code is really important. And so that is how we did that. There were also some community utilities, one of which was called Cyborium, which we realized were really useful for people in the Rust community. So we just made that Apache 2.0 and made that open source as well. Every line of our code was open source, because security is best when it is open source. Again, have to talk about that later on. The other thing we did is we got involved with the communities of which we were part. We joined the Bytecode Alliance, which is for WebAssembly, and we worked very closely with the Rust language folks as well, because as I gave the example before, there were parts of the Rust language and the compiler that we needed to move faster, so we wrote patches for that. We became part of that. We helped guide for the Bytecode Alliance. We wrote a design spec and an initial implementation of a piece of work that we needed, but which other people were going to benefit from. So we felt it was very important to be part of that community as well. So remember I talked about losing control of things. One thing we decided we need to do was to have a product manager, a technical product manager, who was going to help us understand which versions of software we were going to support. Because it's all very well open sourcing something, but if everybody starts putting in updates and patches and maybe adding capabilities that are not really important for you as the person who's creating services out of it, you need to say, okay, well, we're going to turn off these features maybe in the supported product, and that's absolutely fine. Because the community can keep using them and they can turn it on for things they want to do. But when you're using it, you say, well, the version we're going to support is this version with these patches at this level of maturity, for instance. We also got involved with intern programs with the CCC and the Linux Foundation and had some very, very good experience of interns coming and helping and improving what was going on, helping to build that community. So the NArch project is there. You can look at it, narch.io. It's quiescent at the moment, not much going on. I'm hoping that it will be taken on by one or two companies in the future, but not much happening at the moment. But I think we did everything right here. Other mistakes maybe we made in terms of the business. But I think it's a good example of all the choices that we made as we went along. So just want to return very briefly to this thing. I didn't really talk about security when I had this slide up before, but it's on there and it's really important. And this is why. Open source projects are not products. People get this very confused very often. Because when you create a set of open source, that's not something that you can just support and put out there, right? A product is a particular version of a software stack or project which you're going to support, which you maybe done reproducible builds for, which you're going to be signing, which you're going to patch. It's not just a whole, Git tree. It's a particular set of things that you're going to stand behind. And this is where security matters, because there can be bugs at whatever level in the project, but the product needs to understand where security lies. And it may be to say, obviously there's no software is bug-free, or very little software is bug-free. So, okay, if bugs are found, we will patch this version, this product, which is different to saying, of course we'll put the patch into the tree, because that's not useful to your customers. Customers care about products. So my strong contention is that security should be absolutely a very important part of your commercial proposition when you are looking at open source projects. So they're very keen when we put this together. I'll rephrase that. RSA won't let you show your slides until you have a slide which tells you about what you should do over the next few months. So here is that slide. So next week, if there's something that you want to open source, talk to your business. I said talk to your, not talk your business people. Talk to your business people about why it makes sense and how they need to understand all these other bits and pieces. and the trade-offs that need to be made. Do this first, otherwise you're going to have a world of pain. I have a world of pain anyway, but it'll be made worse by business people and legal, because that's what they do. 2, make a strategic decision. This is why you get the business people in. This is not a tactical call. It's a long-term decision about whether you're going to be able to support this, run this, whether it makes sense in the longer term. And the last one is, within the next 6 months, think about products. Because as I kind of just mentioned, your customers don't generally care about the projects. They care about the products. That is what they're going to consume, whether it's services or standalone COTS products. That is what they're going to consume. That is what they're going to complain about when it doesn't work. That is what's going to give them value when it does work. That is where you have to have a proposition. So that's it. And questions? Thank you. So.
Question about licensing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm considering open sourcing a project.
Good.
Looking at various licenses, and there's a new one on the block called the what is it? Business source license.
It's not an open source license.
It's not considered open source.
It's
so
not considered an open source license. Very strongly not considered an open source license. The OSI have been very clear about that. It is restrictive and not considered open source. There's a lot of press around this, and it's a tricky thing to understand, particularly if you don't come from this background. I would steer clear of it for a variety of reasons, legal and community and reputational. I see why people like it, but the people who are doing this sort of thing, they just got bought by IBM, right, for a start. So HashiCorp were among the people looking to use this sort of thing, and before that happened, their open source project was forked by the community, and basically they were thrown to the wolves. So they end up being bought, which is great for them. I kind of get that, but I don't think it's sustainable using these sort of crossover licenses.
So you think it's different than GPL?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, 100% different. It's not. It really does not count as open source.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, you have time for a donut or a coffee or whatever it is. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any other questions, please find me. I'm on LinkedIn, whatever. Thank you.